I recently did a live stream discussing a number of strange paranormal and supernatural reports. One of our regular listeners within the chat, and she reached out to me in email with some experiences that happened to her. And this is titled, "Time is just a human-made concept, and it really doesn't run like we think." And the witness's name is Kelly Shaw, and she was fine with me naming her. And she said, "Hi Debs, I'm a regular listener to your show, and I like to hear the experiences people send in to you. We chatted recently about the strange coincidence between the area of your sighting and the report of the strange white being at Wythenshawe Hall. I'm researching as much as I can on the case online for you, and I'll be in touch as soon as I have new information. I've included some experiences that I had some years ago now. I lived in Manchester when this first event happened on an ordinary estate, and this experience took place in 2002. And it was the hottest of July days, and we'd reached 94 degrees that day. And by the night time, it had only cooled a little. It was still about 84. I couldn't sleep that night, and although I had to work at 9 a.m. the next morning, I was still up around 2 a.m. I went upstairs, I opened the bedroom window, but it made no difference. There was no air moving. I lay on top of the covers in some light clothes, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't settle down to sleep. I tossed and turned until about 4 a.m, and then I gave up. And I started to read a book, hoping that would help me to drift off. Around 4 a.m, I heard a clopping sound. Clip, clop, clip, clop. And I wanted to know who was out on a horse at that time in the morning. So I got up and I looked outside my window. It was daylight by now, and I had a clear view of a figure, a woman. I couldn't see her clearly due to the hedges, but I could tell she was female. And she must be the one responsible for the clip-clop noise. I decided she must have been wearing heels, and that was what I was hearing. It was a Tuesday morning, which seemed a strange time to be out dressed in heels, and she also had a warm winter jacket with a hood, and the hood was pulled tight even in all this heat. I ducked inside so she wouldn't see me as she passed my home. Her clothing was really strange, and I realised she also had on warm trousers, on what looked like hobnail boots, and it was these boots that made the click-clop sound. Her jacket had the old duffel jacket toggles, and it looked very old-fashioned. I stood where she could not see me, and I thought, why would you be out on the hottest day of the year in midwinter clothing and footwear? As she neared my window, I could see her side on. Her hood was up, and she was looking down as she walked. And then she stopped abruptly, and she turned, and she looked directly at me. I stepped backwards, shocked. How did she know I was there? I saw her pale alabaster face, and she had dark eyes and a thin mouth. And everything about her was off kilter to me, and the hairs on my neck stood up. I suddenly thought, why am I hiding? She's the one who's weird. I marched back to the window, and she was gone. She'd vanished. I would have heard her running away. I heard her approaching for long enough. She was nowhere to be seen. I knew all my neighbours, and she was not one of them. And all of the homes had cast iron gates, and you could hear them clang when people came through. I presume she somehow silently got into the garden and hid. I waited for her until about 5:30 a.m. She didn't appear, and I never saw her again. And I wondered if she had a skin condition, and that was why she was bundled up. As I watched from the window hoping to see her, I saw two cats walk from both sides of the street. They met at the spot the woman had been standing, and she was looking at me. I found that weird, as not only do cats not normally greet each other so well in the street, they were not cats that I could recognise. You get used to your neighbours' cats. I slammed that window shut, even in the heat. I just had visions of her flying into the window at me. I never slept a wink that night. I had to go to work the next day. But I did tell a few people, but they never believed me. Now, my second true story was a time slip, and I never knew what that meant until seeing a YouTube video on the subject. In 1990, I was 18, and I was living in Manchester. My father was 61 at the time, was driving the car and I was the passenger. And this was in Burnage, South Manchester. It was an old barbershop run by a man the locals called Chop Off Charlie. He had dropped dead months earlier and his decrepit shop was closed. It had a rusty old grill which covered the window, and it was more like a metal fence and you could see through to the shop inside. That is, if it wasn't still filled with old bags for sale and umbrellas. They were nicotine stained and they were filled the window top to bottom. Not this night though. The shop had been sold and the rusty grill was gone, along with the crappy bags and the umbrellas. Instead, there was a new bay window and a single light bulb inside was replaced with a fluorescent light. 2 men were decorating and it looked great. My dad had his eyes on the road, so I said, "Dad, you can get your hair cut soon, as the barber's been bought." "Great," he replied. Driving home the next night, I'm reading the evening news and we get stuck in traffic outside the barber's. My dad nudges me and points at the shop and says, "I thought you said it had been bought." I turned and looked at it and it was still for sale. The new decoration, the bay window and the new lights were all gone. The old rusty grills were still in place and the nicotine bags and umbrellas were still blocking the window. I couldn't understand it. Even the old window frame was back and rotting. I said, "It was completely renovated yesterday." "Sure," my dad replied. 3 days later it was bought, and a month after that it looked exactly how I saw it that night. That's why I think time is just a human-made concept, and really it doesn't run like we think. It's more like layers. My third story happened when I was night fishing with a lad called Jeff. I was 15 and we were on the River Mersey in Didsbury, Manchester. As we fished in this field, it got really dark and a storm started to blow in. And it was wet, thundery and windy. And we stood out in it, but we left our rods nearby in case of lightning strikes. While the storm blew in, the horses under a nearby flyover where they were stable were whining and whinnying and making a racket. They obviously didn't like the storm. Well, we saw it out and that was about 2:45 a.m. At 9 a.m, a woman came across the field in my direction and she said, "Excuse me, have you been here long?" And I told her we'd been fishing all night and she asked me, "Did you see or hear anything last night regarding the horses under the bridge?" And I said when the storm came in at 2:45 they made a bit of a racket and she said, "Did anyone pass you last night?" And I said, "No." And so did Jeff, who joined me, and she said, "Well, I got here this morning at 8 a.m. like usual, and the horses have been mutilated. Both of the horses had missing ears, tails and other wounds. And as you can imagine, we were shocked. We were sleeping very close when the attacks took place. Who would do something like that? And during a storm?" And they never did find out who or what did it. The last experience I want to share is very strange. And it was related to me by my late father, but it involved my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunt and my uncle. My grandfather was called Herbert Coombs. He was in the Manchester Regiment at the Somme. He didn't speak about it, apparently because he lost all of his friends there. My nan was called Ada. My father was born in 1931 and he was one of 14 kids. This incident occurred before he was born in the early 1920s. My granddad had survived the Battle of the Somme, but he was also injured by shrapnel and he returned home with wounds. He had to find work regardless of this when he returned from the First World War. So he became a window cleaner and he settled down in Stretford near the Bridgewater Canal. My grandparents lived in a terrace house with 2 kids at this point, Ken, aged 5, and Joyce, aged 4. Every night, the kids was rushed downstairs, claiming the wardrobe doors were opening and closing on their own. And as they screamed down the stairs, the next door neighbour would hammer on the wall due to the noise. This happened every night, and my granddad would see them to bed and show them that there was no bogeyman in the wardrobe, but it didn't get better. Then the kids started running downstairs, screaming, each saying something had ripped the blankets off the bed that they shared. Every night the wardrobe opened and the blankets went flying, but my grandparents didn't believe them. The neighbour kept hammering on the wall because of the noise, and my granddad feared being reported and evicted. Seeing the kids to bed again, he went next door and he apologised, saying the kids were playing up and that they'd been told to behave, so you can stop knocking on the walls, it's driving us mad. And the old man replied, I thought it was you knocking. I thought the war had sent you barman and had been too afraid to say anything. He said the noise was coming from the chimney stack they shared. My granddad went white. He suddenly realised there was actually something in the house. He came back in and he didn't tell my nan what the neighbour had said. He just assured her that everything would be fine. That night, with the kids finally asleep and my gran in bed, he sat downstairs by the coal fire. Suddenly, the room grew cold and he felt a presence behind him. And in broken English, a German voice said, I'm a German soldier, you shot in the war. Don't turn around because I'm not a pretty sight, but I just want you to know that I bear you no malice. My granddad was petrified and no way was he turning around. The German added, tomorrow night I will meet you here by the fire and shake your hand. And if you do this for me, then I'll go. And the room grew warm again and my granddad ran upstairs to cower under the covers. My granddad spent the night under the covers until daylight, and the next morning, leaving everything behind, he moved them all out and into another house near Manchester United ground. He swore that if he'd met the German by the fire, then it would have been the last thing he ever did. Personally, I wonder if it was PTSD, but it doesn't explain the kids' wardrobes or the blankets being pulled off every night or the hammering in the walls. My father asked him years later if he could have killed a soldier. My granddad said, yes, I shot people in the German trenches. We all did. It was war.